Tēnā koutou, nau mai, haere mai ki tō tātou hui I tēnei ahi. Ko tēnei kaupapa I tēnei rā, te mea nui mō mātou ko ngā rangatahi katoa, mō tō tātou motu, mō tō tātou wahi, mō tō tātou ao. Ngā mihi nui mō mō koutou kaupapa. Thank you everyone for coming today. Thank you for being here. What we're discussing today is, I was saying, one of the biggest issues and themes for, I think, certainly myself and my friends here, and for our country and for the world, about the future of how we enact change and how we act as citizens. I'm joined by Josh Trlin, Porirua City Councillor, and my friend Gina Dao-McLay, alongside, we were the former co-directors of the Make It 16 campaign to lower the voting age, but I'll let them talk more about themselves. Kia ora. Let them talk more about themselves when we come to it. I'd just like to begin because we're framing this very much as just a conversation amongst ourselves, as friends, with a karakia, because this is, I don't want to say meeting, but you know, this is just a gathering for us to talk about these things, and the one you may know, whakataka hau, speaks to the calming of two winds and the coming together of people that can come in that space, and I think that's very relevant to what we're discussing today. If you've read the information, if not, you're in for a treat, and you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. So, whakataka hau ki te uru, whakataka hau ki te tonga, kia mākina ki ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, e huka, e hauhu, ti hei, mauri ora. Kia ora koutou. Nau mai. Awesome. So, as we get into it, I'd like to turn to each of my friends here and have a brief reflection on what's attacked all of our country recently, Cyclone Gabrielle, and first we want to acknowledge those of you in the room who may have family or history there yourselves, in the past or present, and pass on, I'm really sorry if any of you or your family or your friends have been affected. I hope they're all well, I really do, and pass our respects to those that have passed away in this disaster too. And I think the first question that comes out of this in a lot of our minds, possibly counterproductively, it's often nice to grieve, is what on earth has happened and how do we address this? And most importantly, what does this mean about climate change and what's happened? So I'll pass to Gina maybe first. What are your immediate thoughts coming to mind when you look at what's happened?
Kia ora Dan, kia ora koutou katoa. It's really nice to be here this evening with you all. My name's Gina, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm kind of sitting here as a bit of a greenie on this panel today. But yeah, definitely a super big question and something that's been on my mind, not only through the recent cyclone and the floods in Auckland before, but thinking back to last year with Nelson and their floods as well. You know, it's real. Climate change is happening. We can't just deny it. We can't just think about, is this like just is this political decisions or is this just how it was always going to be? And we, at least growing up, I know that, and when I learnt about environmentalism and climate change and global warming and things like that, we talked about it very abstractly. Something that might happen in the future, might not. There's decisions that could be made to affect it, but you know, it's all in the future. It's not really going to happen necessarily in your lifetime. But I can see now, just even a few years later, after learning that in school, you know, it is here. Climate change is happening. And the action that we needed to take was definitely a long time ago. And I want to really acknowledge all of the activists and advocates in the climate change space and the environmentalism space and the social justice space who have been talking about this for a long time, long before I was born. And yeah, really acknowledge all of their, you know, their efforts, even though maybe it hasn't been so successful as we'd have hoped it to be.
Awesome. Kia ora, Gina. Josh, I assume you disagree completely. No. What are your thoughts and reflections first?
Yeah, cheers, Dan. Kia ora koutou katoa. My name's Josh Trlin. As an introduction, I am a second-term councillor at Porirua City Council. I ran as a Labour candidate. I'm a Labour councillor. I've been a member of the Labour Party since 2013. And we'll get into talking more about that sort of stuff in a little bit. But reflecting on what we're talking about currently, yeah, I'd absolutely echo what both of you actually have said. For me, Gabrielle is one more clear sign that climate change is here. It's impacting us directly and severely, and will continue to do so. It's something that is impacting us absolutely everywhere at the moment. In Porirua, we're still dealing with the fallout of some major floods that we had in Plymouton a few years ago, and there are some areas that when they were flooded there, it was the third time in 5 years that they've been flooded. We're hearing those sort of stories out of the regions hit by Gabrielle as well, and obviously immediately before that the Auckland floods too. This sort of stuff is going to be happening more and more and more often. It's no longer the exception, it is the norm, and we need to be developing all of our policy and action with that in mind. And we need to be bold in the policy that we're enacting as well, and in some areas quite radical, I think. So for me, I think the key things I'm reflecting on and thinking about at the moment with something like this, it's absolutely devastating, happening at the beginning of an election year, setting the agenda a little bit. This is something that we'll be talking about a lot, and we still have political parties now. You may have seen the news today, a National Party backbencher saying that they're still not convinced that climate change is man-made. Of course, they wheeled that back about 3 hours later after they had a very stern talking to from their party leader, who doesn't want any drama going on at the moment. But the reality is that as much as people like us, people in this room, would like to think that there is a consensus on the climate crisis, it's clear that when we go outside of our bubble a little bit that we aren't there yet, and there's a lot that we need to do in order to make sure that not just Labour Green governments, but actually all governments are forced to act in a way that is preparing us for these changes that are coming, because we get the public consensus there. So that's probably what I'm thinking about.
Awesome. Kia ora, Josh and Gina, thank you for those thoughts. First note there, really nice to see the overlap in what we're talking about and the agreement there. It's powerful, it's heartwarming, and most importantly, it's very, very thematically relevant for our discussion today. So thank you for that. I'd like to give you a chance, just off the back of that, I suppose, and you mentioned this a bit in sort of introducing yourselves, to talk about your involvements personally and your stories. I think that's very important. What is the whakapapa of your attachment to these causes, whether that's the form of your political parties you mentioned, but also where that passion comes from for those issues. Gina, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, back when I was about 15, 16, I came across a Facebook group while I was on social media one day. And it was called Make It 16. It was something to do with the voting age. And I was like, oh, this is an issue that, sounds pretty interesting. I'm not sure if I'm going to be 18 at the next general election. So why not join this Facebook group? Why not see what's it about? I've got a couple of people that I know within there. And so then one day after school, I went to a meeting down at the law school. I was at St. Mary's, so it was just a quick walk. And I rocked up, kind of had a couple of people that I vaguely knew of, but no one who had, been super close mates with. But from that first meeting, and then many, many meetings later, I joined the campaign as co-director, was spokesperson for a little bit, and then throughout the kind of 2020 election, did a lot of things for the kaupapa, and with that election delay in 2020 as well, when I was able to vote, was another opportunity to talk a lot more about the voting age. And while I've kind of passed that on now, there's some other awesome younger people who are leading that organisation. Make It 16 is definitely a key part of how I got into politics and why I'm still in it today. And then I guess in terms of my political affiliations, I'd always kind of understood the intersectionality between environmental justice and social justice, and how te tiriti is a big part of both of those things and underpins that here in Aotearoa. So I can kind of say the Greens have always been the party for me, and during that election in 2020, when I had a bit more free time, I decided to volunteer and then join the party as well, and have been there as co-convener of the Young Greens, as well as on campus up at Vic, running our club there as well. So that's kind of been the main things I've joined within there.
Awesome, thank you, Gina. And I'll just piggyback off that to say this is the masterful panel designing of the Fabian Society, which is that for efficiency's sake, if you're asking, Dan, ko wai koe, ia te whakapapa or ukaupapa, the answer is basically all the Make It 16 parts that Gina said. It's basically the same. That's my story too. That's why I'm here. The political affiliation bit, less so, sort of stay with that campaign, the activism. Yep, it's been great to see you, and thank you for that. Josh, same question to you.
Yeah, cheers, Dad. At first, I'd like to reflect, actually, I'm really enjoying this. It's not often I get to do something like this and feel old. But on this panel, I get to be the old one, which is a little bit different, because I'm thinking back to how I initially got involved in politics and activism and these sorts of things, and I reflect back, and I guess a series of radicalising experiences, probably beginning with studying New Zealand history in year 13 in my last year of secondary school, which was a very big eye-opening moment for me. Going to university, my first year of university at Vic Uni was 2013, right in the depths of the key government, and it was starting university in that sort of environment. Again, very eye-opening, very radicalising. Coming from a place where I myself was quite lucky. I came from a relatively comfortable middle-class family. I had the opportunity to go to university. My parents were able to help me out a little bit financially. And so I remember in my first year of university, I was working 15 hours a week part-time alongside my study. I had support from my parents. I was taking out the maximum possible student loan, and I was still, with all of that, losing money every single week. And I was really battling and struggling to get by. And for me, that was a very eye-opening experience, because I remember thinking, well, if I wasn't this lucky, and a lot of my friends and peers aren't, how the hell do they get by? That there is something broken about this. There is a clear disparity in people who are able to access opportunities like tertiary education, and many of those that are here having to work full-time jobs, and their grades are getting impacted by that as well. And there was a fundamental lack of justice there. And so that was probably the tipping point for me my first year of uni. I wanted to get politically active, and obviously I was left-wing. And it's interesting for me, one of the things we're talking a little bit about tonight is the various left-wing parties and what appeals about them to us, and why we are where we are as opposed to in other parties. And I guess for me, the thing that drew me to Labour and joining Labour, there were a few things. One was the ideological tradition of the party, being born out of the union movement, being focused around workers' rights, and some of the incredibly important historic achievements that Labour governments had achieved in the past, and feeling like at the time in the middle of a national government we really need a Labour government again to start to turn some of these things around. And so part of the appeal was that. Big thing for me though is the fact that my beliefs, I am however you want to frame it, a leftist, a socialist. I consider myself to be a democratic socialist. I want to achieve things like collective ownership, social justice, through democratic action. And in order to achieve that in New Zealand, when you think about what's your viable pathway to being able to do that, the concise summary of my beliefs is I believe we need a socialist Labour Party in order to achieve those things. That's why I want to organise within the Labour Party. We have to work with the Greens, we've got to work with Te Pāti Māori, we have to work with other activists as well. And I've got a hell of a lot of respect for those other groups as well, a lot of respect for the Greens and the work that they do. For me, I organise within Labour and for Labour, because that's what I believe we need to do to be able to achieve the things that we need to achieve. And I think we can take a lot of inspiration from looking internationally, similar movements doing similar things. I look at what's happening, or what has happened in recent years. Wasn't quite successful in the end, but the Corbyn project in the UK is a really good example of the type of things that a Labour Party can and should stand for. In the US, Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the work they're doing within the Democratic Party to bring them to a place they need to be. So for me, I'm absolutely involved in Labour, and I think we need to work more with the Greens, we need to work more with other left groups, we need to work more on ourselves as well, in order to achieve the genuinely radical action we know we need because of events like Cyclone Gabrielle.
Yep, very good. Thank you, Josh. He's rehearsed that well, hasn't he? He's done. You should run for council. He's really good. All right. Well, look, we've clearly made a mistake here because you're clearly, overlapping too much, and you're clearly the same positions. So I guess maybe something that might be quite helpful to foment some, like any good sort of reality TV show host, some sort of foment drama and conflict, is, Josh, maybe we'll reverse the order a bit. Why is it that you aren't in, well, what was the major difference? Why you're in the Green Party?
Yeah, so I guess partly the things is that I've talked about there. Again, like I was saying, I've got a lot of respect for the work that the Greens do. I think we need the Greens, we need Labour, we need Te Pāti Māori. We need a strong left bloc, and different parties with different ideological traditions and different focuses are going to attract different people. And ultimately, within democratic society, particularly in an MMP environment with proportional representation, we need multiple strong groups within the left bloc that are able to draw in different people to be able to form a governing coalition in order to achieve the things that we need to achieve. So I'm doing the work that I'm doing within and for Labour because of the reasons that I've talked about. We need people doing that stuff with the Greens as well. And so for me, it's about looking at what appeals the most to my own views, and again, things like the ideological tradition of the party just really resonates with me. And it does with others as well. Other people, the ideological tradition of the Green Party will resonate with them more, and that's really important too. So, yeah, I guess for me, I feel like what I'm doing and where I am is where I can be most useful and where I can contribute the most. And I am relying on, and this is the whole concept of solidarity, right? We're all in this together, we're all working on this together. I need people like Gina to be doing the work they are doing with the Greens, and the Greens to be doing incredibly good stuff as well. And they need people within Labour to be fighting for those things too. Because it doesn't matter how good the Green Party is if you have a right-wing Labour Party that is setting the paradigm for the government that they are working in together. So, yeah, for me, one of the things that we really struggle with, I guess, and this is potentially a unique challenge of the MMP environment, and I'll use Corbyn as an example of this in the UK. If you're a left-wing activist and you're politically active in the UK, you are probably a member of the Labour Party or associated with the Labour Party. There are other parties as well, but they are much, much bigger within Labour than in an environment like New Zealand. In a funny way, that actually means that can be an advantage in some senses, in that you've got a lot of left-wing people within the Labour Party that will fight for it to be a left-wing party. In New Zealand, at various times, Labour has lurched to the right, and often when that happens, left-wing people within the party go, well, this isn't what I want to be a part of, I'll go join the Greens. Fair enough. The problem is, the more you do that, the more it's going to make the Labour Party not a left-wing Labour Party. So if you had everyone go and join the Greens, then maybe that's going to put you in a position where it's actually going to compromise that coalition. So yeah, for me, it's about saying you need both, and this is where I feel I can do the most.
All right, that's not the drama I was looking for. You put that too diplomatically, but there's a semblance of an idea. Okay, good. All right, Gina, same question. Why are you not in the Labour Party?
That's a great question. And then when you sent me that email, I did message my friends and was like, should I cause some drama? But I'm definitely not going to do that. Yes,
please.
I think there's two reasons. So firstly is I've never been around for a non-MMP election. I've only ever known MMP my whole life, and so as I learnt a little bit about it, elections in school, and as my parents told me a little bit more, I understood that actually it's not just having a two-party system as it might be in other countries. There are other parties that have a pretty good shot at becoming parts of government, or at least having a good representation in Parliament, and so I never had been worried about joining maybe a smaller political party for those reasons. And then the second one is probably the people who I saw within the Greens, not just MPs, but other kind of leaders within the Green Party as well, who really resonated with me. The likes of Jan Logie and Chloe Sawbrook, of course, and then some of my other young Greens like Danielle Marks and Kate Ashoff, who now have become really good friends of mine. It's them who really, showed me what being in a political, not just party, but a political movement is about. And that definitely kind of drew me in when I already was kind of on that wavelength anyways. And also for me, while of course I'm in it because it's a political party, I'm also there for the community and the movement outside of things like elections, both general and local government as well. I'm there for the other parts of it too. And so that kind of kept me in. And then lastly, I think a really big, and what we've been focusing on particularly recently within the Greens through things like changing within our internal party is having te tiriti at the basis of everything, not just in Parliament, but within our kind of branches, provinces, networks as well. And so that work and that mahi done by some really tireless members and now really good friends as well has kept me in it too.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, more drama would have been good, but it's okay. Look, our viewing figures are going to crash. This is not entertaining TV. Right, the next thing I want to talk about is sort of reflecting on the past that we all have in different ways as coming this, completely non-partisanly as campaigners and activists for certain things. And then maybe, I suppose, because you've both got sort of a lot of experience with this, a lot more than me, you know, how you've both sort of engaged with that through different places. Again, be that it could be parties or something else. And I think to say both, I'll start by sort of sharing a little bit of my view on this, which is, I recall when Gina and I were the co-directors of Make It 16, that we worked very closely with a variety of activists. And there was very little cohesion between them, very little getting along, a lot of actively not getting along, a fair bit of bickering, not necessarily within Make 16, but amongst other groups, and sort of how best to respond. So it became clear that this is never just about the relationship between these institutions, but also a claim of ownership over other independent ideas, other sort of, you know, ideological bases and areas of activism. I recall us talking to people in the Labour Party and talking about the processes there, and because of course they were the government and, you know, and leaders of the government at the time, and how the prospects were of achieving what we needed to achieve, and how we needed to convince them of those ideals. I also recall talking to members of the Green Party at the time, and who I think were a lot more willing to be immediately in agreement and sort of speak on those publicly. But then in the public sphere, there was a lot of lack of coordination between how these things interacted. And I think just from the Make 16 perspective, and again, there are different examples of this. I recall, I think it was last year, it could have been 2021, where there have been members' bills put up by both parties that address different areas of the same topic, different themes, sometimes in a competing way, even if they don't contradict each other, always in a way that's going to undermine the other, because they're both coexisting and never being talked about together. There's never any coordination. And it will come as no surprise to any of us, probably very little surprise to all of you, that eventuates in very little happening. None of them passing, none of them getting done, because one always has to be the one that owns it, that claims it. And I remember just from an independent viewpoint, that being frustrating, and Labour and Green are obviously some examples of this, but that extended to other activist movements too, who we tried to coordinate with. There was always a tentativeness in how that was approached, how much one domain was held over one particular area, one group of activists, one issue, one ideological base. And I don't want to force the thesis on this conversation, but my view is that was counterproductive, that didn't work. And it hasn't, evidently. So I suppose the question for both of you, and I'll leave that to whoever wants to take it first, is, what's your view on that? Because, of course, you've both sort of got this connection to parties and one side of this. What's your view on how you interact with those independent ideas, whether or not they're represented by a movement, like Make 16, just the idea of lowering the voting age, for example, or any other thing, climate change, social justice, whatever. How have you engaged with that from your sides, and do you think that works the way it does? What would you change about it?
Yes, I guess a few thoughts on that. And it's interesting, these ideas of independent ideas coming from other groups, and engaging directly with political parties and who gets ownership of those ideas. And it makes me reflect on sort of the very interesting political culture that we operate within, because even this idea of the ownership of who gets to take credit for this type of thing, which political party is going to benefit from it the most. And it all comes back to this way. It's difficult to describe. I feel like we've almost marketized our politics in a way that makes it very difficult to actually affect change in the way that we want to through building a mass movement. Because if within the left you have a really good idea and other people within the left think it's a really good idea as well, and we want to achieve that, then that should be part of the movement that we are attempting to build together in order to enact this sort of change. And it's not something there's an easy solution to there, because it feels like a cultural problem with the way that we approach our politics generally. So I don't have this is how we fix it, but I can feel that the problem is there. We need to be working with activists, absolutely, but in the same way that, in the left we need to be working actively with unions. We need to be working with all of these different groups. And one of the things I'd reflect on, actually, something that I think the Greens are quite good at doing and that I do admire, is using politics directly as a form of activism. Which I think can be, when done well and when done boldly, can really help set the agenda and move things. And a perfect example I would use of this is something like, I remember back sort of between 2010 and 2014, the Greens are constantly going on about child poverty, and then we get a Labour-led government being formed in 2017 with the Prime Minister saying that my number one thing is child poverty. It was a very specific shift that happened there. As a result, well, partly I think as a result of some of the activism that the Greens had done as well. So for me, do we need to be working with these groups? Absolutely, of course we need to be working with these groups. I think we need to have a think and change about the way in which we approach some of these things, and part of that actually is to do with the reform of the way that our political parties themselves operate. I think anyone who's ever been actively involved in a political party of any stripe has probably experienced a degree of frustration of having ideas and trying to get them to flow through to the top, and actually genuinely feel like the environment you're in is a true reflection of what the membership, the rank and file, wants. I think it's a very important project of members of left-wing political parties to actively democratise them as much as possible, because the more you democratise the parties, the more these things will just automatically happen anyway. So there's a few different ideas and sort of a little bit of a weird ramble. I think I've addressed the question as you've posed it, but yes, I guess to summarise, yes, absolutely, let's do more of it, democratise our parties more, and focus less on political parties and more on political movements.
Kia ora, yeah, I totally agree with that one. As you were mentioning a little bit back at Make It 16, I kind of stopped listening, started thinking about all of those many Zoom calls with those many different and interesting people of, all different sides of the political equation, which was an interesting time, certainly, but definitely resonate with what Josh was saying. And I think it's an interesting time when you are within like a particularly issue-based campaign or group working for something, and maybe this political party wants to say this about it, this one wants to say support it, but not everyone does, and it's kind of a bit of coordination at times, a bit of admin and things like that can be the way to go, a bit of organising in that kind of sense, but then definitely sometimes it's just, you don't need to talk about the political party, you don't need to talk about the political stripes, we just need to talk about it and do something about it, I think is also a big part. But I think, for me, a big part of how we can be doing this more is not necessarily through the way we have a parliament and a government at the moment. Things like reforming our political parties, reforming things like our constitutional arrangement, and actually having a properly te tiriti-based parliament and governing system in Aotearoa will achieve many of these things that we are trying to set out to do, and different issues-based groups are trying to set out to do. If we work together on reforming the system, we always talk about systemic and structural change that needs to happen. Well, if we want to focus and we want to solve that, we need to be focusing on that as well.
Thank you both. I mean, that's really interesting. And I say that both of a reflection of myself, but also sort of to grab your attention. That is really interesting, because actually that's not something, that's not a pair of reflections that we often get from, at least certainly from the anecdote I was sharing about our experience with Make 16. It's not common that you get this sort of viewpoint and agreement from two parts of this sort of activist world, especially with sort of your both different affiliations. And so thank you for that, both of you. How lucky are we to have this? It's possible they're just errors in their own parties and that they're not actually the norm. But the hope is that this is actually a reflective of a real generational shift, and so that would be quite nice, wouldn't it, towards more cooperation. Thank you. I wasn't fishing for that, but thank you. Well, a little bit, but thank you. Okay, so I guess next question in my mind that comes out of this, and I've referred to Josh's wording about less of the parties, more of the movement, you know, and working that together. And Gina's comment on sort of a very similar way of looking beyond these sort of structures we have now and looking towards how they can sort of be manifested in a different way. You know, to an end of those like constitutional changes you said, but also just these other issues we've talked about. I apologise. I'm sorry for this. This is the question. How do we do that? What is the way we look at this? And maybe to provoke it, I think one of the things mentioned in the title of this event, or certainly in the description, is looking at how it's been done overseas. And Josh mentioned some examples of overseas things, but what we've seen quite recently is in certain places, I think particularly of Chile with the election of Gabriel Boric, a closer coordination certainly between disparate parts of a similar movement for that exact end, for the sort of the greater success of everyone together, for looking past those things, for saving the resource and energy that's expended on the bickering amongst each other, to achieve something greater. What does that look like in Aotearoa? Is that something, let me go back to Josh, is that something that you think we can achieve? I guess that's an example as an electoral bloc, but is that what it needs to be? What sort of coordination would you like to see?
Yeah, so there's a couple things to speak to here. So first, around the coordination directly between parties, there's some things that I do that I think we do pretty well. Everything through from having the formalised memorandum of understanding between the parties, I think, is very good. On the campaign trail, one of the things we always do is work from a Labour perspective, is to work with the local Greens to look out for each other's election hoardings and fix them for each other if they get knocked down, and all of those sorts of things. There are small things that we can be doing to work together, and then other things that we can formalise as well. I think a lot of that just sort of naturally happens over time in an MMP environment when political parties begin to realise that actually this is just the way that things are and we have to learn to work together, and we'll be stronger for it if we can do that and present that united front so we actually look like a legitimate option at government. In terms of the underlying problem, there's a lot I could speak to here. I think, how do we do this? I personally think the single most important thing that any person can do is to join a political party and encourage other people to join a political party. And I specifically say a political party as opposed to a particular one, because we just need mass movements and mass memberships. Of course, I will actively encourage people to join Labour and work within Labour and do stuff there. Part of the problem with our political system, I think, that we have, and this is potentially maybe an unintended negative byproduct of MMP, which, for the record, I support. I support proportional representation, I think is good. Part of the problem that we appear to have, and as someone that has only really lived through MMP, it's difficult to directly compare. I feel a lot of people view politics as something to consume as opposed to something to do. And part of that is in an environment where you have a number of, say you know your left wing, and you have a number of different left wing options to choose from. As an average voter who is very busy, who is probably working more than 40 hours a week, who's got a whole lot of problems on their mind, who doesn't necessarily have the capacity to get actively involved in a party, it's much easier to take a step back, look at the options and go, well, which flavour of left do I like the most? And I'll vote for that one. And that's the way that a lot of people engage in politics now. It's the one thing they'll do every 3 years. One thing we don't seem to have is people actively getting involved in political parties in the same way that we used to. And when I say we used to, I'm talking decades and decades ago, a time that I never got to experience. I was born in 1994. All I know is MMP. But when I go to my local Labour Party meetings, people there talk to me about how big the party used to be, how many members we used to have, how we had all of these different branches just in Purirua that would all come together. And it's nothing like what we have now. And you can't build a mass movement without mass participation. It is a necessary and fundamental component of that. So to get people actively aware of what we need to do, to get them thinking about working together in the direction that we're moving in, I think we need fewer people consuming politics and more people doing politics, getting actively involved themselves. And so I think that's a necessary condition. And then all the other stuff, the working together things, of course we need to keep doing that. But without getting people actively involved as a mass movement, I think it's going to be very difficult to get there.
Can you just explain what you mean by consuming politics?
Yeah, so
Sorry, Josh, for the benefit of people listening online, also, the question was that for an elaboration on the phrase consuming politics, what does that mean?
Yeah, so that's this idea that you may not do anything political other than voting every few years. This idea that you see politics as something that happens to you, as opposed to something that you are a part of. And I think just that the nature of the conditions that we currently exist within, how tired everyone is, how overworked everyone is, it's very, very easy to say, well, the thing I'm going to cut out is being involved in the local branch of my political party, when if I don't like what they're doing, well, I'll just go vote for the other ones instead. It's very understandable. So I don't necessarily, look, there will be people who have done much better research and know a lot more about this than me that might be able to point to exactly, what the conditions are that have created this environment, but I think we can all see that it's the environment that we're in. And so that's why when people talk about, I don't know which party suits me the best, I don't know which one I should join, my advice to people is saying, just join one. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it's not going to be perfect. And do your best as a member of that party to achieve, to push it towards what you want to achieve.
Can we ask some questions? Or what do you think?
Again, sorry, just for microphoning for online people, well projected, thank you, the question is about how Josh, for example, might push Labour to, use MMP better to work,
Exactly.
to work with the Greens, the electoral agreement.
Yeah, and then make all this cooperation real, not just waffly.
It's a good question, and it's interesting when I think about this idea of working with parties in particular seats to make sure that a particular party might win that seat. What I would contrast, I guess, is if you're talking about minor parties, is the strength and depth of the Green Party versus ACT. You think about the quality of MPs that we have in the Greens versus what exists in ACT. I think part of what makes the Greens strong is, compared to a party like ACT, is that they are fully capable of standing on their own 2 feet. They don't rely on Labour giving handouts. Take Auckland Central. Labour fought hard to win Auckland Central in the last election, and Chloe won. The Greens won. They did that by themselves without being given anything. You compare that to ACT, who had just given Epsom every year for who knows how long. Now they've managed to come back up a little bit, and they've basically got David Seymour and then a bunch of others, and no one knows anything about them, and they don't really do anything. So should we be cooperating? Absolutely. I don't think the Greens would want Labour to say we're not going to compete in a particular seat. I think, take an example, again, Wellington Central, we know that Tamitha Paul is running for the Greens this time. I don't want to speak for Tam. I suspect she wants to win the seat on her own merits, as opposed to through cutting a deal. So for me, I think particularly now that the Greens have established themselves as clearly getting above 5% in every election for heaven knows how long, I don't think they're at risk of being knocked out of Parliament. I think we're actually stronger as a bloc if we fight for things in our own merits and then work together as much as possible. I'd be really interested in hearing your thoughts on that actually, Gina.
Kia ora, yeah, great question. I think what Josh was saying is correct. Like, we are here to do the organising, to be out in the community and to win that seat or get those votes on our own terms. We don't need to be handed them or anything like that. It is great to be able to work together, and as Josh mentioned earlier, looking out for each other on election campaigns is really important and something that we do anyways, and I know within like Young Labour and Young Greens across the country, on local campuses and other spaces, we do that too, and we don't have to necessarily help each other out too much either. And so totally definitely on the same wavelength. We want to be winning those on our own terms. It's nice to have someone like there with us, and we know it's on a similar wavelength to us, particularly in maybe some spaces that aren't so welcoming to those of us on the left. But yeah, we don't always have to have a certain formalised agreement in order to affect change.
Thank you both. We've got a question at the back there first, and I'll come back to you too.
Kia ora, my name's Grant, and I'd like to pick up on your comment that there's an awful lot of agreement going on here. And I think that sometimes we can illuminate the subject if there's a bit of heat and a bit of light shed on it. So let's just, I thought I'd like to throw it as a challenge and an alternative proposition to some of the ones I've heard tonight, and see if each candidate, each speaker can respond. So look, the description of the Labour Party is having its ideological roots in the labour movement and having a socialist tradition. I'd just like to compare that with, for example, United States politics, where you could equally be said that the US Republican Party has its ideological roots in the emancipation of slaves, through Lincoln's presidency, and of course the Democratic Party was the party of the southern slave-owning, plantation masters. But the ideological roots don't tell us very much about the nature of the party today. So let's just cut through that one. And the Corbyn project, that was enormously inspiring to me as a socialist and a trade unionist. But the kind of grouping within the Labour Party that enabled the Corbyn project to even have a chance of succeeding doesn't exist in the New Zealand Labour Party, because it left in 1989 with Jim Anderton. That was the New Zealand equivalent of the Socialist Campaign Group. And those people, they went into the Alliance and then many of them into the Greens. And so with the trade unionists and the socialists looking around today at the current state of these parties, I find that the Labour Party is the one which attacks my union as speaking with a forked tongue. I'm a nurse, an active trade unionist in the nurses union. The party which speaks up for us when we go on strike is the Green Party. They did it in 2020. They did it in 2018. And this is not an aberration. The Greens, through Jan Logie, and before her through Steve Bradford and many others, have been the party that speaks up for trade unionists. And Labour today has only 6 affiliated unions, not the hundreds of thousands of members through the unions that used to exist. And so I put it to you, I put it to the speakers, and I'd like to comment on this, that today the party of the unions and the socialists is the one with the anti-capitalist network, which is the Green Left, which I belong to, rather than the Labour Party. How do you guys respond?
Sorry, for the benefit of speakers online. So the challenge is that perhaps, the ideological roots have faded, and that the modern party that better represents some of these movements, unions was the main example, is the Green Party as opposed to Labour. And so yes, what are both of your thoughts on this? I'll give Josh a chance to respond, because he's the one being challenged, I suppose, more.
Cool. Fair enough. So I guess I've touched on some of these things to a degree already. What my position on this would be, I guess, is that if we want to achieve the things we want to achieve as the left, as activists, as unionists, as members of a political party or whatever in New Zealand, we need a strong left-wing Labour Party. I believe that is something that is absolutely necessary, that we need. So I don't stand here as a member of Labour to say I fully endorse everything that every Labour government has done, because I don't. I know my view of the Labour Party as someone who is inside it, I suspect is probably quite different to a lot of people from the outside. You meet the average rank and file member of the party, whether they're a member through a union affiliation or otherwise, and they tend to have views that align a lot more with what we would think of as a traditional Labour Party. Have Labour governments in the last 20 or 30 years delivered in the way that we would want them to, compared to the historic traditions of the Labour Party going back to Michael Joseph Savage? From my perspective, probably not. I don't think that is helped by someone like me leaving the Labour Party. So, if anything, we need more people actively organising within the Labour Party, because a lot of people did leave. You're absolutely right. So, if we look at the strengths of Labour and its ability to achieve what we need to achieve, and I think about this, if we want to achieve democratic socialism in New Zealand, what is the path of least resistance? Do you bring Labour to its roots? And there are a lot of people in the party who do sit there. Or do you turn the Greens into a party that consistently polls above 30%? You probably have to do one of those two things. And if you do that, you've probably drawn a lot of left-wing people out of Labour to the point where it's not a centre-left party anymore, and may not even be willing to work with the Greens anymore, and it's creating another issue. That's why, for me, you need to have that. So the Greens are doing some great work, absolutely. They will appeal to different people, to people who the Labour Party is appealing to. I come from Purirua. I look at the presence of different political parties in different communities in Purirua. When you go into some of the poorest and most deprived areas of my community in Purirua and look at who has a presence there, who turns up to events, who is actively organising there, it's the Labour Party. They have that presence there. The Greens are very good at tapping into other other groups, other demographics as well. And so that's why for me it always comes back to saying we need both. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, Gina, do you want a quick comment?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the Greens, I mean, I am a bit of a party hack. You know, I do believe that the Greens are, you know, the homes of progressives and unionists, and the people who will be fighting tooth and nail for progressive movements. But Josh is absolutely right. We're not going to work with a conservative Labour Party. I don't think we are willing to work with a centrist Labour Party. We need the people who are within that, within the party, within associated movements, to be pushing them further left as well, so we can work with them together for our shared common goals.
Thank you. Very good question. Very good answers.
And
Great
actually,
demonstration of the point we're making.
Can I very quickly add something else as well? If you look at some of the things that, is everything the current government doing perfect? No. But there are some good things that are happening. Fair pay agreements, spearheaded by Michael Wood. So that's excellent. That's very good for workers everywhere. That is Labour Party policy delivered by a Labour government. So there is absolutely good that is happening. And for me, I'm saying let's do more of that, and let's have a membership within the party that is driving for more of that.
Right. Thrilling to hear the agreement, as always. Right. Couple of questions over here.
Josh, you mentioned democratic parties. Would you be able to tell us more about this? What do you think, how that could be done?
So the question's about what do we mean by democratising a party?
Yeah, so this is something that I believe in very strongly, and basically the short of it is saying that members of political parties should have as much power as possible as opposed to the institution of the party itself. And that's in everything from developing the manifesto of a party to selecting the candidates to choosing the leader. I think at every moment we should be doing everything we can to put power back in the hands of the membership as opposed to power sitting in the hands of senior officials within the party, or even caucus as well. Often in most political parties, caucus has a lot more power than the membership itself. And that's why often the views of a lot of members in the political party may not align, often won't align with what the caucus does, with what a caucus is doing. So for me, I think that there's definitely, as a member of a party, one of the key things that I'm always very conscious of and that I'm always fighting for is to, when we're figuring out how a decision is going to be made, to err on the side of going to the members.
Cool. Thank you, Josh. Just not a lot of time. I will come back for questions. I just want to give Gina a chance to answer the question that I didn't get a chance to before. Because the question to Josh originally was about, well, to both of them, was about looking at the cooperation that we sort of seem to espouse that we want. How do we manifest that? And I thought we sort of got the example of local electorate deals, and it seems like that's firmly off the table from both sides. So that was a really good suggestion, because that is a good, obvious example of what that could look like. So if we want more cooperation, politically in this case, although I will add a little slight non-partisan correction that, of course, getting involved in a political party is great. Getting involved in other movements and activism is great too. And union or whatever, you're all welcome to join the Make 16 campaign. There is no age limit. Not that would apply here. So I think that yeah, Gina, the question to you then is what would that cooperation look like, manifest to you?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I totally agree with Josh on that. Joining a political party, joining a political movement, but not only joining it, but for those of us who already are part of those spaces, making sure that they are safe and accessible for everyone, and making sure that people of all backgrounds, no matter how much they know or how little they know about politics already, that they are welcome in those spaces and are able to take up maybe leadership positions or be able to kind of coordinate and run events and all types of different types of things that one might do in a political party. Ensuring that, I think, is a key part of engaging and encouraging others to join political movements and parties. But if I've got to go for like my idealised world, this is what I want to see Aotearoa do. It's that everyone understands and has te tiriti education, not only within schools but for everyone, and that's why I really mihi and acknowledge to groups like Asian Soa Tino Rangatiratanga and the Treaty Action Collective in Pōneke, who do these education workshops and sessions for people to understand more about our history in Aotearoa, because while it's really awesome that we're doing it now in schools through the histories curriculum, that's a bunch of people who won't be going through that education themselves, and then working towards and honouring the work that Mātiki Mai, the Constitutional Transformation Report, has asked of us by 2040, and that is some change within our political systems. And so what that specifically looks like, not too sure yet. There's some awesome scholars and rangatahi as well who are a part of those groups and looking towards what that might look like more tangibly, but that's definitely something that I'm keen on, and also trying to talk about more with more people, because we can't just try and make some change without talking about it first.
Thank you, Gina. That's really good, and it sounds like possibly the answer to the question, unsurprisingly, the answer to the question of how we fix literally everything with Aotearoa is possibly one that we can't answer right now. And so my expectations were high, and so no, it sounds like we've got a really good solid basis for a really common understanding of what we'd like to end up with. I think how we get there is clearly something to be negotiated. Although one of the big overlap points I will pick up on is that both of you talk about very strongly in those answers an increase in membership. Well, the membership of your parties, but I think the broader theme there is an increase in people actively engaged in these causes and actively engaged in things. So I wanted just maybe as a quick little hopefully yes or no, hopefully yes, question is sort of, maybe is that a nice potentially beginning avenue for greater cooperation in these things, is if not deals electorally, an agreement to work together on strategies to build and organise more members, if it's a political party, or more engaged people and participants if it's other things. Is that something where the groups could usefully work together?
Maybe. I think one of the benefits of the system we have with multiple viable left-wing parties is, as we talked about before, is that different parties will appeal to different people. And so that's why when I say join a political party, there is probably a party that sits a little bit closer to what you think than the others, and that you feel closest to. It might be the party that you voted for in the most recent election, or are planning on voting for in the next election. So I think encouraging membership generally is good. I don't think it needs to be something that we formally necessarily work together on. I think parties would and should focus on building their own membership as much as possible. So, yeah, definitely building the membership, but I don't think it's something that we would necessarily benefit from trying to actively work together around. I don't know. What do you think, Gina?
Yeah, maybe is a good answer. I think that, there are lots of different reasons why someone doesn't want to join a political party. Maybe that's their job in the public service, or anything like some other kind of roles that they might have. And so I think, not necessarily that they have people who need to engage in a party in that way, but even things like volunteering, helping out and supporting like an election campaign could be a different way that's not so formal as a membership to join. But yeah, there's lots of, there's like so many different ways we can coordinate more, and maybe not the focus for that one.
Cool, sounds good. Okay, so yeah, maybe in terms of even with the engagement of these independent sort of activist groups, there's possibly a nice sentiment there that with greater coordination in whatever respect, it's more likely that people will stay around. So I think the other thing, of course, is that the intense competition, especially between people who seem to agree with each other on everything, is off-putting, funnily enough, to a lot of people. And I think that's certainly something that I like about you, Gina, I felt like we saw in our campaign. And that's a nice little message to take away. Is there's sort of a clear space for each different group, but certainly overlap enough to merit some joint pursuit of greater participation, whether independently or actively through one of these groups. Fantastic. Okay, we'll go to questions. Where do we have? So I believe first we're over here.
Okay. My question is related to you talking about your movements with trying to get the voting for 16-year-olds, and just how you came against the opposition, even though there was activists in different parties coming together. There was sort of conflict, and that seems to be a big problem with the left. The left can work together for a wee while. I mean, example, the Alliance, how it's self-destructive. It seems to be a very common problem worldwide that the left somehow self-destructs, where for some crazy reason the right doesn't. So that seems to be a problem. So I wonder how you can address that and what your ideas are. And my other question is, maybe all three of you, or even just Josh, the idea of what do you mean by democracy socialism in this day and age?
Thank you. A good question. So, for the sake of getting through questions, we'll give one question to each, maybe. So the question directed to Josh was what he means by the phrase democratic socialism. Josh has been clearly big on the jargon today. Lots of clarification questions. He's a very smart boy. And you're very smart as well, and more so. Why not? Yeah, well said, Dan. Gina, and the other question was, what was the other question? Sorry. That's right. That works out well because Gina was with the May 16 campaign. So looking at that experience, why is it that there was so much of that infighting, maybe, and what can we do about it?
So I'll go first. I'm very glad that I'm not the one that has to figure out how to stop the left from imploding. I get the much easier question. So good luck, Gina, and you can have a think about that while I talk. For me, when I say democratic socialism, I mean socialism achieved through democratic means. Collective ownership of the means of production, social justice, radical climate action. That's what I view as democratic socialism.
Cool. Thank you, Josh. Gina.
I don't have an answer quite directly, quickly, about how we can stop infighting within our own progressive and left-wing movements. But I think there's a few things that we can be doing, and that is open conversations where we are laying out, our beliefs and our values right there, rather than maybe trying to hide around or walk around the kind of topic or the question. I think that can be a really powerful thing that can be done more often. I also think that kōrero and conversation in person rather than online can help a lot. I don't know about you, but I'm an avid Twitter user, and oftentimes there you can see people saying things, maybe they do kind of come from similar values, but they're saying things that, and having really maybe strong or passionate arguments about them. And I often wonder, if you were talking to someone in real life, would you say those things? Would you talk like that to them? And so I think that moving of course, things like COVID-19 and other reasons why moving online for some things is really important, but sometimes I'm like, let's have this conversation in a room, in person, and try and come to our shared understandings and goals through that way as well.
Fantastic answer. Look, I've been decidedly, because I'm in the middle and asking questions, I've been very neutral and non-committal to these things and letting my friends here take the opinions. But I will very, very gladly agree that Twitter can and should burn. That's okay. That's my addition to this. Anyway, right. Next question. Yes.
You began by talking about climate change. Can we get back to that? Because climate change is not really a political issue. It is an issue that you have to bring together. There are other issues like that, social justice you brought up. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, quite a few of those actually act together. And that is what I think is what we actually need. To talk about young people, Dan actually won our speech award, but so did Chris Bishop, and Jacinda Should. She won it twice in Hamilton. But One of the problems is with young people, they're not taught civics at school. They were many years ago, and they are in many countries. I think that would bring people in to understand what we are talking about. Yes, I think political parties have a right to have a different view of things. I don't think that's going to go away. Can I say, I've just read the 100 years of the Labour Party from 1916 to 2016. I actually understood quite a lot of it. It's actually written by a professor at Victoria, English, because I come from a fairly political family. In fact, there were a whole lot of little things there that I could have seen. I heard my grandmother, who apparently turned down one of the cabinet ministers in the first Labour government. But there were an awful lot, there was a lot of discussion and argument going on even then, and I think we forget that. Yes, the Labour Party came together. Some say it was very late in coming together, but it did come together, of course, because of the Depression and such. There very often is a reason why that helped you, and doing good leadership, that's quite right.
Okay, so we'll speak to this one.
Right.
A couple more questions. I've got the question at the start.
Another one you want to ask? Right. There's maybe a couple more questions afterwards. So the question, I think, let one of you take this if you want.
Civics at school.
It's a good example.
So I've forgotten what the question was at the start.
I speak to this with you. Like you talked about how climate change.
That's right. How do we adjust the framing? What is a political issue? That's right.
Yeah. So and I think that's a good reframing. Climate change shouldn't be political. Unfortunately, it is. It is very political, and in fact, I would say it is the defining political issue of the time that we live in. Is it something that we should accept and all be on the same page on and plan around? Yeah, absolutely, of course it is. But as I mentioned at the start, we had today a National Party MP express doubt about that. We know that there are others within Parliament who believe that as well. I myself, as someone working in politics, I know that definitely all elected representatives do not see eye to eye when it comes to this stuff. So I think it's important that this is something that we do actively talk about, that we actively seek to build consensus on, and that we centre with a lot of the policies and ideas that we come up with and talk about, because climate change is going to impact absolutely everything.
Right, thank you, Josh. Right, questions? I saw hands before, but that was you there.
Follows on from that, really. It seems to me there's probably a bit too much agreement between you guys. And it seems to me that, a public debate where people express some differing views, but, in a polite and constructive sort of way is the only way you'll get that constructive engagement across to the wider public. So I don't think Twitter is a good way of doing that. It becomes too abusive and too polarised, but I think, in-person discussions, civic education, they're all sort of ways of getting that good debate going. And in fact, I've worked in public service many years. That is also a constructive, process of honing ideas and getting them more sophisticated and really developing them in a way that's, a lot more subtle and a lot more constructive. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Gina, I'll let you reflect.
So sorry, so the question for the benefit of people online is, or the thoughtful reflection is, I suppose, focused on the good means of fostering and constructing debate. That's right. So exactly. So public fora where things are done constructively and nicely, and as opposed to Twitter maybe. How do you see the role of those, and how can we encourage them?
I'm happy to speak to that first. It's an interesting one. We talk about we'd agree a lot. I'm sure if we got into the weeds of policy, there'd be plenty of stuff that we would disagree on and that we would work through around how to achieve particular things. And it's one of the things about being on the left, right? We all want to change the world. We want to make it better. Of course we're going to disagree on how to do that. It would be insane if we wouldn't. That disagreement is inherent to the radicalness of the project that we are involved in. That is always going to happen. And that's something that we should celebrate and be excited about, as opposed to let ourselves fracture apart on. And just reflecting back on this idea of, how do we stop the left from fracturing apart? How do we stop this infighting? I think defaulting to this idea of saying, we're going to disagree on stuff. People are going to get things wrong. That there's going to be that these active issues that exist. focusing on the fact that we're here for the same reason, we want to achieve a similar outcome. Let's focus on working through those things in public forum discussion, coming together, figuring out what the consensus is, building that into the movement that we're trying to achieve, as opposed to defaulting to this idea of disagreeing with someone means that you have to fracture away and not be associated with them. Because but building a cohesive movement with that as an instinct is literally impossible. There's no way that you can possibly achieve that. So it's a cultural thing, I guess, that we have to do. And the more we get together and talk about this stuff and work together, the more we'll be able to achieve that, I think.
See, we've played a blinder here. I mean, how many panel discussions get organised where, without prompting, we haven't paid them at all, they literally advertise more of these sessions being a good idea within their question answers? How well have we done? Thank you. All right, Gina.
Yeah, totally total what Josh has said, but definitely, like, if we were talking some very specific, like, if there were very detailed questions, we definitely would disagree a lot more than we are doing today. But oftentimes when we're thinking about cooperation, when we're thinking about our shared goals, maybe there's some slight differences between them, but oftentimes, particularly between us, they are going to be the same and similar answers that we're going to share. I think, like, for me, politics happens all of the time. Politics is power, and it's happening, and we're talking about politics every day at our dinner tables with our friends, even if we don't really know we're talking about politics at all, because it's being affected. Things we're talking about are affected by central government, by local government, by those with the money and with the power all of the time. And so maybe we aren't always thinking that we are talking about politics or this is a political discussion, but oftentimes it is, and it is affected by it. It's about, for me, it's about linking those topics, those things that people are passionate about, and linking it to not just elections, but politics in general, and how people can get involved, and why it's important to get involved too.
Awesome. I want to make a quick note that it's very interesting that you both make these presumptive comments that you would disagree immensely on policy issues. I know over several years each of you much better than you know each other, and I can tell you I cannot think of a single thing off my head that you disagree. I think honestly every single policy issue. I think
the only thing is that Josh and I both live in Porirua, and I'm going to say my part of Porirua is the better one.
No, I'm not fostering this bit. Yes, we have a question back there.
Thank you very much. Josh and Gina, most of the points that you've raised can I actually say are bleeding obvious? Now to talk about something real, you need to actually look at what, if you want more people in the Labour Party, all you've got to do is present character. If you really have good correspondence on the issues, good coherence of ideas and policies on infrastructure, climate change, evidence of skill and inspired actions, you'll have no problem. You don't have to worry about party membership. You'll get just droves coming in, you know, because people want to believe in something that they can really feel. Please, be real, you know. Now, what you really need to do is look at your instruments. You've got the Infrastructure Commission, right? What's it doing? I mean, it's got a lot of lovely words that it produces, but what is it really doing? Come on, really. I mean, these are instruments that they're very expensive. They're very top salary people, you know? I mean, what are they doing exactly for these things? Those guys can get into research. There are computer simulated research.
Could we have a question and not a speech, please?
Okay.
I think the benefit of the speech is what I was going to say.
I think the thrust certainly is that I think originally at the initial point is what's the real way that your side of things can maybe project itself to get those members coming in more easily. I'm going to ask that we avoid the specific question about the Infrastructure Commission, because that is a policy issue that we're probably less here to talk about. It's a great question.
And one that I'm not well placed to speak to anyway. So there'll be people who can give much better answers as well. I guess I'd remind, for the purpose of this discussion, I'm a rank and file member of the party, so I don't speak for a lot of those sorts of things. But in terms of, I guess, my view around how you get people actively involved, I think people will want to be actively involved if they feel empowered when they are involved. If the party is doing a lot of really, really good things and people feel like they don't need to be involved, then why would they get involved? And that's why I talk about democratising the party. If you are a party member, you want to feel like you can actually actively influence what the party is doing. And so that's one of the big focuses for me. So there's a degree of chicken and egg here, right? If we want political parties to do good things that reflects the will of a mass movement on the left, then you need people to be joining those parties and contributing to them in order to make that happen. So that's why for me the focus is around democratisation, getting people involved as much as possible, and then the good policy will come.
Okay, we had a question over here. I'm going to make this probably our last one, I'm afraid. This is the last hand up.
Thank you. As active members in both your parties, and noting the tragedies that have been inflicted on New Zealand as a result of storms and climate change, there is an opportunity now to recommit to the role of the state. How confident are each of you that the other party will seize that opportunity and promote the role of the state? Because the people who don't have insurance won't be getting their televisions, the people who haven't been captured there. So if you could critique, as the chair has been encouraging you to do, the other parties. So let's start with the Greens.
See, the question is about how confident each of our friends are with the others, the others' party's ability to seize, what was the phrase, seize the opportunity of using the states that's right, to respond to
Cyclone Gabrielle. So what's very cheeky is that I think the gentleman knows exactly what they're going to say, but I'm going to fully encourage it, because it is, as he rightly points out, more drama. Good. Who wants to go first?
I'd like to hear from the Greens first.
Go, Gina.
I think, the simple answer is there's a reason why I'm in the Greens. There's a reason why I have actively put in time and energy and volunteer mahi into the Greens. It's because I think that they are the political party who we need to see in Parliament to be actively uplifting the voices of the vulnerable, to be actively speaking up on climate change. And I'm going to do it. And that's why there are so many of us, and particularly in regards to things like climate change, who have been in the Greens for such a long time. I wasn't around when we signed that cooperation agreement between Labour and the Greens at the last election, or the one beforehand, and I think perhaps there could have been stronger in these types of, I guess, what's the right terminology, like decision making and the principles that you're discussing on. But I don't necessarily think that it is just the role of the state in this situation. Like, yes, there is a massive role for government to play in regards to not only this current weather events we're experiencing, but for me, the hope I see more so is in the community, and the community coming together and working with each other to support each other.
That's really good thought. Thank you, Gina. That's really good reflection. And Josh?
I guess I don't want to speak for what I think the Greens are going to do or how they'll go about approaching this. What I can say is I think we need a Ministry of Works. I think that's something that, or a Ministry of Green Works, focused around climate infrastructure as well. I think that's what we need to be talking about here. It's something that I think Labour should be talking about the Greens with. We're already coordinating our approach to repair in Auckland. We have a minister who is focused, and Michael Wood, on coordinating that response. And it's clear that the market has failed to provide the institutions we need to be able to respond to things like this from a number of workers' perspective, from a resourcing perspective. It's a long experiment that was doomed to fail from the start, and it clearly has. Right now, here is it's not an opportunity, it's a need. It's something that we absolutely have to do. So I suspect that there would be many people in the Greens who would be on board with that sort of thing. I know there's a lot of people within Labour who want something like that as well. Let's get that done.
All right, both phenomenal responses. Aren't we lucky to have both of you in our country as active, engaged citizens? Aren't we all? Aren't we, everyone?
Isn't that nice? And
I think we have to end the session, unfortunately. I want to say thank you very, very much to Gina Dao-McLay and Josh Trlin for joining me. My name is Dan, by the way. Sorry, that wasn't relevant, but I didn't say that at the start. So I'm just the bloke here. It's been really nice to hear from you both. I say both my friends who I'm extremely proud of, and all the work they do. And thank you for coming and for sharing your candid thoughts on how this goes. I also want to reflect, as I have sort of throughout this, how special an opportunity this is. It's not often that we get. I think there was reference made before to the constructive nature of a public forum where people are talking nicely to each other about the things they agree on and maybe where they don't. And that's what we've had. It's even more special, I think, to hear it from two people who are both really engaged in their generation in these sort of issues, and which gives us, I think, well, at least certainly gives me a great degree of hope that they will carry that forward in their careers and lives, wherever that is, in terms of activism or campaigning or politics or whatever. And I really hope you share that feeling, because it's something I feel really strongly. Thank you.